Hello, welcome to In this episode, What Women Want. We investigate whether women's preference for taller men leads to a lifetime of happiness, and find out if it's more important for a man to be generous than handsome. Now, before we get stuck into the science in today's show, I've got a couple of announcements to make. First of all, those of you who've been listening to the podcast for more than a year will know that I used to post episodes on a monthly basis. So for the first 6 years of the podcast, it was a strictly one episode a month deal. It's only been since early last year that I've started posting episodes more frequently, every 2 weeks. And this has worked out really well for the podcast, I think, because, well, first thing is more people are listening, which is great. I'm super grateful for the fact that more of you are listening. I think the number of subscribers to the podcast tripled in the last year, which is phenomenal, more than I could possibly have imagined would happen. I'm eternally grateful that anyone listens to this, because I am just some bald goon recording a podcast under a duvet in my living room, and people listen, which is great. And so if you've started listening in the past year, thank you. If you've been listening even longer than that, thank you even more, okay? Because the longer you've listened, the more thanks you deserve. That is how I feel. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to move back to the earlier schedule, the schedule of one episode per month, just because it's taking up more of my time to produce 2 episodes a month than I really thought it would. Most of you will know that my day job is as a psychologist who studies the kind of things I talk about on the podcast, the psychology of attraction, jealousy, mate choice, that kind of thing. And putting out an episode of the podcast every 2 weeks has inevitably meant that I've had less time for that research, that work. And I thought that might be sustainable, but it turns out that it's not really. So, that's why I'm moving back to the 1 episode per month schedule, and I hope you stick with me as I do that. The podcast isn't going to change. It's still going to be the same podcast. It's just going to be once every month like it used to be. The other news is that I now have an app for the podcast, and I sort of sound like a bit of a fraud saying that, because I am the last human being alive who does not own a mobile phone. So I've never downloaded an app, so I don't know why people want apps or whatever, but I am led to believe that some people prefer to listen to podcasts through an app, right, than through their podcasts app, okay? So if that is you, then great. Then you can just go to the Apple store and search for Psychology of Attractiveness podcast, and you'll find the app. You can download it and you'll get updates about the podcast. You'll also get updates about my blogs through the app. So some of you may know that when I produce the podcast, the reason why I normally sound so fluent and eloquent is because I script everything I say in the podcast. Apart from this bit, can you tell? Well, so for the normal parts of the podcast, I script it. And so I post the scripts as blogs on my Medium page, and you can find links to those on my website, robertburris.com, or on the website for the podcast, psychologyofattractiveness.blogspot.co.uk. One day I'll get a better URL for that. I won't, will I? So anyway, the blogs that I post there, they'll also come through on the app if you download that. Okay, enough of me waffling on. Happy New Year, and let's continue with the podcast. Women are attracted to men who are altruistic and good-looking, but these traits are possessed by few men, except some of us. Anyway, neither altruism nor handsomeness can simultaneously top a woman's list of must-haves in a partner. So, if you're a woman and you had to choose, what would be more important to you? Would you prefer a partner who's helpful or handsome? To find out, Daniel Farrelly, a psychologist at the University of Worcester in the UK, tested the preferences of 200 plus heterosexual women. Farrelly showed the women pairs of photographs of men. Each pair consisted of a handsome man and a less than handsome man. Each were labelled with a letter. While looking at the pair of men, the women were asked to imagine a scenario in which the two men played a part. For example, in one scenario, person S and person T, the two men pictured on the screen, are both at a picnic beside a river that has a fast current, and they see a child being swept down the river, gasping for breath. A woman cries, "Help! Save my child!" Now, one man in each pair was described as acting altruistically in this scenario. Person T hears the mother's cries and decides to jump in the raging river to try to save the child. The other man, not so much. Person S sees the speed of the current and chooses not to try to help the child. Here's another scenario from the experiment with the two men's responses. Two people are walking through a busy town and notice a homeless person sitting near a cafe. Person E decides to go into the cafe to buy a sandwich and a cup of tea to give to the homeless person outside. Person F pretends to use his mobile phone and walks straight past the homeless person. I love the detail there, like it's not even as if the guy just walks past, it's like, no, I'll just check my mobile phone. It's probably updating his Psychology of Attractiveness app. Anyway, other scenarios presented in the experiment were neutral, with no opportunity for selfless altruistic reactions. For example, Person O and Person P both go out clothes shopping. Person O decides to buy a green jumper and Person P buys a pair of jeans. Buying a jumper instead of a pair of jeans tells us nothing about which man is more altruistic, so this was the control condition. After reading the scenarios, the women's task was to rate the attractiveness of each man for both a long-term relationship, such as marriage, and a short-term relationship, like a brief affair or a one-night stand. Now, as expected, altruistic men were rated more attractive than non-altruistic men, with average desirability scores around 3 compared to around 2.1. Physically attractive men, with average desirability scores of around 2.8, were more appealing than less handsome men who scored only around 2.2. Altruism appears to be valued at a premium over good looks. Non-altruistic men were less attractive than physically unappealing men, and altruistic men were more attractive than handsome men. Put in simpler terms, a man's physical appearance seems to be less important to a woman than his altruism. In reality, of course, comparing altruism with physical attractiveness is rather like comparing apples with oranges. We don't measure a man's handsomeness and his generosity on the same scale. Perhaps altruism only appears to be more valuable than good looks because of the types of scenario that Farrelly presented to his female volunteers. The same could be said for the photographs. If the difference in physical attractiveness between the paired men was insufficiently striking, we shouldn't be surprised to find that women place greater weight on altruism when judging men's desirability. More interesting to me were Farrelly's results when he tested the effect of relationship type on women's preferences. He found that altruists were rated more attractive for a long-term relationship than a fling, which isn't what I would have expected. Jumping into a raging torrent to rescue a drowning child strikes me as generosity bordering on heroism. And I would have thought that risk-taking heroes, firefighter types, would be more alluring to women for one-night stands than for marriage. But what do I know? I'm neither a hero nor a woman. Farrelly also found that selfish, non-altruistic men were more appealing as short-term than long-term partners. Perhaps women see these men as stereotypical bad boys, always out for number one, because past research suggests that women prefer cads to dads when looking for a casual hookup. Farrelly suggests that, quote, Future research needs to examine the effects found here in men's ratings of the desirability of altruistic women as well. This is because there is a lack of such research in this area, as most studies have concentrated only on women's ratings. Now, I'm pretty sure that most men value female appearance over female altruism, although I'm happy to be contradicted. To find out for sure, we'll have to wait till the results of Farrelly's next research project are in. If we can be sure about anything when it comes to women's preferences for men's physical appearance, it's this: that women tend to prefer taller over shorter men. We know that this is more than just a preference, because research shows that women act on their desires. Male dating profiles advertising tallness receive more responses and result in more dates. And taller men are more likely to marry. Women want taller men, and, if they can help it, they pair up with taller men too. But does getting what she wants make a woman happy? Is shacking up with a lanky man the path to everlasting contentment? This was a question recently posed by Ki-Tai Son, an economist at Konkuk University in Seoul, South Korea. Son reasoned that because tall men enjoy all manner of privileges on account of their stature, including higher wages and increased social dominance, life with a taller man may be better than the alternative. Rather than quizzing a small number of women about their happiness and their spouse's height, Son harvested data from two huge datasets collected in Indonesia, the Indonesian Family Life Survey and the Indonesian Family Life Survey East. These longitudinal projects began in 1993 with a survey of 22,000 individuals living in over 7,200 households. And the people running these surveys have revisited their respondents periodically ever since. In his paper, published recently in the journal Personality and Individual Differences, Son says, Indonesia presents an interesting case because it belonged to the region where the mean height was the shortest in the world over the past 2 centuries, and the population remains one of the shortest populations in the world at present. When tallness is scarce, women may enjoy more happiness from tallness than otherwise. Respondents to the life surveys answered the question, taken all things together, how would you say things are these days? Would you say you were very happy, pretty happy, or not too happy? The respondents' height was also measured. On average, the Indonesian men in the survey were 10.9 centimetres taller than their wives. Son's analysis of the data revealed that a 10-centimetre increase in this height difference was associated with a 3.9% increase in the probability that women would report they were feeling very happy rather than pretty happy or not too happy. In other words, the more a man is taller than his wife, the happier she says she feels. Because men's height is related to their income levels, Son suspected that the relationship between husband's height and wife's happiness could be explained by taller men earning high wages. Tall men might have happier wives because they're wealthier, and not simply because they're so statuesque that they keep getting their hair caught in the ceiling fan. Indeed, women were happier if their men earned more money. A 100% increase in a man's salary accounted for a 2.1% greater probability that his wife would check the very happy box. Still, accounting for earning power didn't eliminate the effect of height. Son concludes that a man's pay packet can't entirely explain the link between his height and his wife's well-being. Son also found that the effect of height dissipated over time. As a marriage progresses, a wife's happiness is less strongly related to her husband's height. After 18 years of marriage, the influence of height on happiness vanishes. By that point, women are no more or less happy if their husband is tall or short. So, women are happier when they're married to a tall man. But even if their marriage lasts, it's no guarantee that they'll live happily ever after.